Hello, you're taking Early Baptist History. I'll be teaching the class. I'm David Howell and looking forward to it. Monday night, the very first class is the introductory class. Will not be as long as some of the other classes. The classes will be 13 weeks and then there'll be a final. Looking forward to doing it. When we study early Baptist history, you're studying the influences of Baptist history a good bit of the time. And I think it's going to be real exciting and good. We taught church history a couple of times, and the people really like this section of many of the things that we're talking about. So that's one reason why we wanted to put this class together for this. The main two books that will be used in this, and this one for many weeks, is the Anabaptist Story by William Estep. My wife actually worked for Mr. Estep back in 1979 and 80, was secretary for him, and he did an excellent job on telling about the Anabaptist story. That's one of the major books that we will use. The other one later in the semester we will use is Readings in Baptist History by Joseph Early. That will be our supplementary second text for the second half of the class. Now, main thing is to have read through pages 43 by Monday, January 25th. You were supposed to read through the first 21 pages if you could before the introductory section. But make sure you try to get books and things and have it read through page 43 of Estep's book. And we'll be starting off with the Anabaptist story. Now, what is the Anabaptist story? It's a good question. The key is the name, Anabaptist. All right. The Anabaptist movement start almost at the same time as Martin Luther is starting the Lutheran Church, and a man named Zwingli is starting the church that will evolve into the Reformed Calvin Church of John Calvin about 20 years later. And it is at the very beginning of the Reformation, as we know it, when the churches other than the Roman Catholic Church began to grow and exist, that the Anabaptists appear on the page. The actual modern Baptist movement, as we would call it today, actually starts about 1607 to 1610 in the Netherlands, but they're started by English-speaking Baptists, and so that's an interesting thing. But they are heavily influenced by the things that happened the first 100 years before them. And to be honest, whereas Martin Luther really steps to the forefront about 1511, he is heavily influenced by what happened about 100 years before him. So as we look at this, back to the Anabaptist Story book by Dr. Estep, the Anabaptist name means that they believed in another baptism. That's what Anna means, another baptism, and they paid for it. Before the Anabaptist, there was only what we would call baby baptism, baptism in the Catholic Church for hundreds and hundreds of years. You probably have to go back almost 1,000 years before Luther to find baptisms that were not baby baptisms. Of course, people who would get converted as adults, they would be sprinkled and join the Catholic Church at that time, but 99% of the people at Luther's day were getting baby baptized under state-run church that was the Roman Catholic Church. And Martin Luther, a monk, a Catholic, and Mr. Zwingli, what's called an old-type humanist. By the way, the word humanist just means you believe in literary studies, and it's what many of the people who did literary studies, books, reading books in the 14 and 1500s were called humanists. Don't think of the modern terminology for what it means to be a humanist. If you get you a Webster's dictionary, or if you'll notice it somewhere in the early readings of Estep where he'll explain that just being a humanist means you are open to reading and study and things to help you with your decisions. The modern concept of humanism not being Christian or friendly to Christianity is different. Now, there were those in Luther's day who were very worldly people who would have been called humanists, but the Christians and the religious people, their humanism is basically because they wanted to learn what the Bible actually said in that. So just don't let that word hang you up a little bit. So Zwingli is basically a seeker, humanistic person who also knew how to do some political control on a local level, who began to be very interested in studying the New Testament. And one of the reasons it's a great New Testament study, you'll see in the early study we're doing, is a guy named Erasmus had made a Greek New Testament that was becoming available to many scholars in Europe, where people could actually go read deeper to find out what actually was said in the New Testament. So that has a lot to do with this growth. And of course, go back even a little further, the printing press made that available. So the Anabaptists start almost at the same time, and they're hanging out with a man named Zwingli, and he gives them freedom to do Bible study, and I believe it's over in Switzerland, and things like that with Mr. Zwingli. And in doing so, a few of them began to notice that as more they read the scriptures, they had lost their belief in baby baptism. And this is where they get the term Anabaptist. Another baptism would be needed. They came to believe that you should only be baptized after you came to know Christ by faith. That was really the key to when you get baptized. And of course, they would be using the book of Acts a lot to come to that. Think of the Ethiopian, Acts chapter 8, who is an adult. Why? What keeps me from being baptized? Well, you believe in the Lord Jesus Christ. You choose him. Think of Paul in Acts 16 with the jailer. What must I do to be saved? Believe on the Lord Jesus Christ. Be baptized after that. And so because of that, they began to believe that they needed another baptism. Well, they were actually thinking of sprinkling at that time still. That was so radical for around 1525 that for most of the 1500s, if you came to that belief and did that, you were hunted down like criminals. And not only would the Roman Catholic governments, mainly the Holy Roman Empire, persecute you and may even put you to death, and often did, the Lutherans and Calvinistic movement, which also began, they began to look with disdain on those, and they are even also known for putting some to death for that belief. It seems strange to us today. Now, in the 1600s, there were a few cases of Baptists who were actually put to death for that belief in baptism after salvation, but it was more persecution and things like that for that time period. So you would say, well, that's just such a simple thing. Well, that's really the key and the problem. The Anabaptists then would not be involved with having a state church, whereas like the Catholic Church were the state church of like France and Italy and Austria and the Holy Roman Empire, Austria, northern Italy. Lutherans would be the state church of Germany and those around them. The Calvinistic movement will be the state church of like Switzerland and other nations, and eventually in Scotland and things like that. And so the Anabaptists' other gift they give us is what's called the free church movement. That means their churches will not be connected to the state. Another thing that we get from the Anabaptists that we will look into, and this is mainly one of the major things they helped affect the Baptist church, especially in England, is being separate from the churches, breaking free from established church, nation type churches and things like that. They also the local church having so much authority and the ability of churches. This is where Baptists really will become well known in the early 1600s, is not only will they separate from the major traditional churches. Of course, by the year 1600 in England, you'd have the Church of England, which today we would think of as the Episcopalian Church. So there is good reason to study this. And Eastep, who was a professor at the school I went to, Southwestern Baptist Seminary, wrote an excellent book. And it's actually, as far as I know, Protestants, it's the main book about learning the history. But like in Luther's case, starts the Lutheran Church. It's a state-run church. And you say, well, what about Luther and his influence? Well, Luther is the one who says you need to be a Christian by faith, that knowing Christ by faith is what's important. That's a pretty important standard too. So we'll be looking at all these things. Make sure you study pages 1 through 43 before I see you on the 25th of January. Now, the first 10 pages in Eastep's book is going to be kind of dry, and if you don't really know a lot of these things, read it. You're learning it while you read it. But around page 10, you're going to find out how good of a storyteller Mr. Eastep is, and we're going to really focus on a guy named Conrad Grebel. Conrad Grebel is what I call him. He is very important in the very start of the Anabaptist movement. When you get over into about page 21 and following, you're going to find that he was a heathen. He was a real heathen before he got right with God. Keep that in mind. Also, many of the students in that, if you think back to like 1511, 1515, most of the cities and that were starting to appear and grow in size as, I guess you'd say, the Dark Ages had come to the end, they are very worldly. And a lot of these students who are supposedly trying to study and learn are very worldly, so don't let that surprise you. And then it is in that darkness that so many of them came to know Christ, and that's why it's so important. Thad will have some things to give you about the study of what you should read and when and why. One thing I want you to notice is the purpose of the course is to study the roots and influences that led to the modern Baptist church in England, America, and the world. Now, as we get further in the course, we will also study early English Baptist, the general and particular Baptist. You'll want to know what that means. Early American Baptists and influences. We will also spend some time on William Carey and the modern mission movement. We will also, at the very end of the class, show how from about 1840, many things affected Southern Baptists for today. And that event. It's very important that we study these things so we won't have to repeat the mistakes again. We will also learn how important it is to choose to be a Christian. Even when the world tells you it doesn't matter to be a real Christian. Well, it does matter. And any of these people we're going to be talking about, they actually paid for this great joy that we are to be able to Christian, not be persecuted. They were persecuted for it. So we'll be studying a lot of that. You will be required for now for students who are getting this for credit, they will be required to turn in a term paper, and they will also be required to do a final. Those things will be required. There will also be 2 tests during the course. I do want all students to take those 2 tests as to help you learn. We would do some minor little one-page things from time to time to have like reports and different characters. So those are what's coming up. And as we look at this, we will get a great appreciation for many things. The events that we will spend most of our time on these first few weeks happened in the early 1500s. And we'll be learning who these people are. I appreciate you taking this class. Thad is a good dean of the school. He will help give you more instructions on things that we will be studying. We will also tell you about some supplemental books. There's some really good readings and some stuff for church history books that I'll have available. There's a really good book by Mr. Estep, which is out of print, called The Lord's People. Talks a lot about early Baptist history. I have one of those copies. We'll be using that. So good to have you on board. And make sure you get a chance to read the first 43 pages of the Anabaptist Story by Mr. Estep. Take care and God bless.